Thank you, Alex, and thank you to all of you for sticking around for such an awesome conference. Give Alex and Anita a big round of applause. You know, when I first talked to Alex, I thought, hey, this is a cool guy. He has a lot of interest and passion, and little did I know that he would be bringing hundreds of people, for hundreds of dollars a ticket too, no less, to come all to a conference, not 1 year, but 2 years in a row. So I have a lot of admiration for the people in this world who actually don't just speak about doing things, but who actually do them. And Anita and Alex have done such a stellar job. I know you just gave them a round of applause, but please give a round of applause also to all of the numerous volunteers. In fact, if you're one of them, raise your hand, and the rest of us will applaud you right now for doing everything. Thank you. Got 1, 2, 3. All right, we got some of the volunteers in here. We're really grateful to you for helping to make this conference what it is. So thank you to each of you for your great work here. Now, I want to tell you a quick story. And it's not a recent story. In fact, it takes place in 1830. So in 1830, the fastest mode of transportation that anyone had available to them on land had 4 legs, and it required a lot of feed. In fact, quite literally, our civilization was built on the backs of horses. Now, of course, at that time, while horses were the fastest way to get around, you all know that cars eventually, many decades later, were going to replace horses as our mode of transportation. But at that time in 1830, while there were no cars yet, there was another mode of transportation that was starting to come online. In fact, it was coming on 2 lines, the rail car. What you had was a new system being put in place along the east coast of the United States to connect those cities to some of the more inland cities, or what they called the western cities at that time. And the most ambitious project at that time was to connect Baltimore all the way to Ohio. Now, for those of you Monopoly fans, like I am, of the game, not the practice, although I wouldn't mind that either, but if you like Monopoly, you know about this railroad, because I like to buy that property a lot. It's a really good one from Baltimore to Ohio, the B&O Railroad. Well, the B&O Railroad barons at that time had no plans to run engine-powered trains from Baltimore all the way to Ohio. And instead, their plan was to run the trains just the way everything else ran at that time, on horsepower. They didn't envision that there could possibly be a train that could self-power and have enough energy to transport it up hills and around turns, and let alone to go fast enough to make it worthwhile. Well, at that time in 1830, there was one entrepreneur, Peter Cooper, a man who claimed that he had invented a rail car that he called the Tom Thumb, which he asserted could actually do a better job than the horses, could get the rail cars from Baltimore to Ohio faster than the horses could. And like any good entrepreneur, whether in 1830 or today in 2019, he wanted the barons of industry of his time to take notice of what he was doing and, of course, to buy his product. Well, so Cooper started talking, and the lead stagecoach company at that time didn't like what he was saying. And in fact, they shot back and they said, you know, Cooper, if you have something that's so good, why don't you put the Tom Thumb where your mouth is, and let's have a race. They were so assured that no machine would ever beat their horses, and they challenged Peter Cooper to a race between the Tom Thumb and their very fastest horse. Cooper, assured that he could actually win this race, accepted the challenge, and the race was on. In 1830 in Baltimore, they lined up on 2 parallel tracks, and they put the Tom Thumb right next to this fastest horse and towed them both to cars that were filled with their human masters. The race was on, and off they went. At first, the Tom Thumb kept up with the horse. They're going nose and nose, neck and neck, just like a horse race today. However, eventually, the horse started fading. The Tom Thumb pulled ahead, and everyone, from the naysayers to the supporters of Peter Cooper, all were really impressed. But a belt on the steam engine broke. The Tom Thumb stalled. The horse pulled ahead and ended up taking first place in the race. Pretty amazing day for the horse, and the stagecoach company was elated. They claimed they had been vindicated, that no machine indeed would ever beat their horses. Now, of course, all of us with the benefit of hindsight know little could have been further from the truth. In fact, the B&O barons were so impressed by the Tom Thumb that that very day they placed orders with Cooper to produce more of them. Now, interestingly enough, this helped propel Cooper to become a major player in the entrepreneurial space. And not only did he produce and sell these Tom Thumb railcars, but he actually, interestingly enough, for this space, went on to become the first person to ever patent a method for manufacturing gelatin. And he sold it to the company that invented Jell-O, and he became very wealthy and became a big philanthropist in his older days. And in fact, if you've ever been to New York City's Cooper Union, that is named after this same Cooper, Peter Cooper. Well, in 1830, the Tom Thumb could only go 18 miles an hour. Today, of course, we have trains that are going over 200 miles an hour. Well, at least we have them if you're not in the United States, but that is a different tale to tell about train power. And who knows, if Elon Musk has his way, maybe we'll be going around in the Hyperloop at upwards of 700 miles an hour, as he is promising. Now, of course, what does any of this have to do with cultured meat? It turns out quite a lot. Compare the trains of 1830 to the trains of today. It's apples and oranges, or maybe we should say it's Tom Thumb and Maglev. Very, very different trains. They just kept getting better, and hopefully they will continue to do so. But compare the horses of 1830 to the horses of today. Really not that much of a difference. In fact, 21st century horses are nearly the same as 19th century horses. They just can't get that much better. Yet the trains of then and now are radically different and will continue to do so. Well, the same is so with the meat industry today. Sure, conventional meat today may win the metaphorical race right now if that race were held today. They may win on cost, they may win on convenience, they may win on a whole criteria of things that we care about as consumers. But ask yourself this: how much better can the cow get? How much better can the chicken get? How much better can the pig get? And just like the horse, the answer is not much. Yet when we divorce meat production from the raising and slaughtering of billions of animals for food, how much better can meat production in these better methods actually get? And we know that the answer is a radical, radical difference. In fact, it could be as different as the Tom Thumb railcar going 18 miles an hour and a maglev train in China today going upwards of 200 miles an hour. So I like to think about the cultured meat space in the following way. Yes, it can help solve problems like climate change. Yes, it can help solve animal welfare and food safety problems. But I think that it can do even more than that. I think that it can open up entirely new, novel culinary experiences that we have never even envisioned ever in our lives. Think about it kind of like cheese. Imagine the time after the cow was domesticated, but before cheese was invented. Nobody had figured out yet how to curdle the milk and make the cheese. And at that time, the entire world of culinary experience of cheese, think about it, cheddar, Gouda, Swiss, Brie, and so on, no one had ever even dreamt of it. Nobody ever thought about the existence of these foods because no human had ever consumed them. And yet it opened up an entirely novel culinary experience to human beings of eating all of these new types of foods. Well, think about what cultured meat might do. And we're not shackled to this primitive technology of raising and slaughtering animals that we've been doing for thousands of years. What types of experiences might we enable? I like to think about it like maybe think about if you go to your friend's house today and you see that she has a bread maker or an ice cream maker on her counter. It's kind of cool, but you hardly even remark on it, right? Or what if she had a meat maker on her counter? What if she was ordering or maybe even 3D printing little stem cell tea bags that she was putting into the meat maker and she could actually produce real meat right then and there? Wouldn't that be cool? Now, we can't do that today, obviously, and in fact, actually, I think that Yuki from Integral Culture would say that we can do that today. But it would take, starting from scratch, it would take a few weeks, right? Because you're starting with individual cells. It would take a long time. You'd have to know what you wanted to eat weeks in advance. Not the most convenient thing to do. Although, that is what people do when they brew beer in their homes, right? They brew their beer for weeks on end and then consume it. So you could see maybe somebody wants to do that and brew meat in their home today. But we can have a world of, for example, where you could have truly local artisanal meat production right in the confines of your own kitchen. Or maybe you're going to go to your local pub. And just in the way that today they might brew an IPA in the back that's their own local artisanal beer, they're maybe brewing their own meat right there that has their own local flair. Maybe even the animal from whom those cells came, let's say like a pig, is that restaurant's mascot, and he's rooting around in the backyard behind there. You can go tip your hat to him in the way that Ira Van Leeuwen, who is in the audience, but I mean her father, Willem Van Leeuwen, who was the pioneer of the cultured meat space. In fact, the first person ever to file a patent on a method of culturing meat to culture meat. In the same way that he famously tipped his hat to a cow, maybe you'll go into the back of the restaurant, tip your hat to the pig, go in, and then enjoy that sausage right then and there. Or maybe you think about people today. Anybody hear of a turducken? Anybody here had a turducken? Well, if you haven't had it, good for you. If you had, I'm sorry. But a turducken, for those of you not initiated, is a chicken stuffed inside of a duck, stuffed inside of a turkey. And you can have all three species of meat in one cut, right? Well, why have to do it in such a primitive way by putting one bird inside of another bird inside another bird when you could brew those three bird species cells all together, interweaving the proteins, and you can enjoy a true, real turducken right then and there without having to assemble this monstrosity known as a turducken. So, of course, there's all types of culinary experiences that we don't know about yet. The ones I'm envisioning are ones that, who knows, I mean, they may happen, they may not, we don't know. But more likely, there are things that none of us have ever even fantasized about that I think cultured meat can help to bring about. Now, some people will say, okay, that's cool, but why do you need cultured meat? Couldn't you just do that with plant-based meat, right? Can't you make similar things from plants as you can with animal cells? Well, sure, I think there are different technologies, obviously, but yes, I do think that you could also open up new types of culinary experiences through plant-based meat, or even meat that's made from microbial proteins, or even now there are companies making meat literally from thin air. It's pretty amazing. And when people ask me, they're like, you know, why are you so bullish on the cultured meat movement when in fact you have the Impossible Whopper, you've got the Beyond Famous burger in Carl's Jr. and so on. And I think about it the following way. Anybody here know how much meat is sold in the US every year? Anybody know how many pounds? It's about 100 billion. Anybody here know how many pounds of plant-based meat are produced in the United States each year? Under 200 million. In other words, if you're not a mathlete, I've already done the math for you. 99.8% of the meat that is sold in the United States today comes from raising and slaughtering animals. In the same way that in 1830, virtually all transportation was happening through horses, today virtually all meat production is happening through slaughtering animals. Well, plant-based meat is starting to rise, but we don't yet know who the winners are going to be. Think about it in the following way. Imagine the problem of fossil fuels. The problem of fossil fuels is so severe, it's such a problem that you want lots of alternatives to fossil fuels, right? You don't want to say, hey, wind is awesome. We don't need solar. We don't need geothermal. We don't need fusion. Instead, we should think of an all-of-the-above strategy to say, yes, fossil fuels are so bad that we want lots of different alternatives to the fossil fuel problem. Well, similarly, factory farms are so bad that we want lots of alternatives to factory farming because we don't know what will win, and in fact, what will win is probably going to be more than one option. In fact, it wasn't just the Tom Thumb that ended up displacing horses. It was cars, bikes, motorcycles, planes, boats, and so on. So in the same way that you have these type of cultural transformations, you want lots of different options. And I do believe that by having these divergent streams that are going really parallel to one another, like plant-based meat, like cultured meat, and like meat that is made from microbes even, that we can have a type of system that displaces the incumbent in some type of fashion and allows them, who are the innovative members of the incumbent technology, to get involved and be a part of this solution. This isn't about putting anybody out of business like what happened with Dean Foods this past week where they went bankrupt. This is about letting the major players in this space be a part of this innovation so that they can be a part of the solution for 21st century meat production as we have billions of more humans coming onto the planet wanting to eat more and more like Americans do, which is a diet that's very heavy in meat and eggs and dairy and other animal products. And we know that we can't afford that. We know that Americans need to be eating less meat, and we certainly know that we don't want the rest of the world eating as much meat as we do because the planet is not getting any bigger. Yet, humanity's footprint on the planet is getting bigger, and a major reason why that is happening is through our food print, primarily in how much meat we are consuming. That's why, for example, I'm so enthusiastic not just about cultured meat and plant-based meat and microbial meat, but even blending. Because if you think about it, think about meat in the same way you might think about the vehicles of today. We have nearly all the cars are powered by fossil fuels with an internal combustion engine. Less than 1% of vehicles sold today are electric cars, in the same way that less than 1% of meat that is sold today comes from the plant-based meat companies, and 0.0% is coming from the cultured meat companies, right? So if we know that even if we were to triple or quadruple the popularity of plant-based meat, still statistically speaking, virtually all meat for years to come is going to be coming from animals who are raised and slaughtered for food. And so I believe that, yes, we want to be pursuing electric vehicles, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we hybridize and improve the fuel efficiency of the cars that 99% of people are purchasing. And that's why my own company, the Better Meat Co., is so enthusiastic about partnering with the biggest meat consumers and meat users in the country and indeed around the world in order to help them do better by using more plants and less meat. And so what we do is essentially make plant protein formulas that we sell as ingredients to major meat companies for them to blend directly into their meat so that they can enhance the taste, nutrition, and sustainability of their products, essentially improving the fuel efficiency, so to speak, of their products. One example of this, for example, is with Purdue. No, not Purdue Pharma, I mean Purdue Farms. Purdue Farms, the chicken company, uses our plant protein formulas to blend into their chicken nuggets, tenders, and patties for a product that they call Purdue Chicken Plus. Those 3 products are now in 7,100 stores, Walmart, Safeway Albertsons, Kroger, etc. And they are approximately a 50-50 blend of plant-based and chicken. And you know what? When in a blind taste test, consumers try the solely chicken product versus these blended chicken products, about 60% of them say they can't tell any difference whatsoever. About 30% say that they actually prefer the blended version, and about 10% say that they prefer the solely meat version. So think about that. That means that 90% of those consumers who are eating now half the number of birds who they were eating before say either, I can tell no difference whatsoever, or I actually prefer this new version of it. Think about the power of what type of sustainability improvements can come about and public health improvements that can come about simply through a blending strategy. I think it's one of the more promising technologies that there is today to help drive forward a better, more efficient, more humane, and sustainable food future, and that's one of the reasons why I am pursuing it. Now, when we think about the future and what all of these new technologies may bring about, whether it's blending, whether it's culturing, whether it's plant-based extrusion, and so on, I believe that it is going to bring us to a better future. I believe that it's going to bring us to a future when we end our reliance on such unbelievable exploitation of billions and billions of animals in ways that most of us don't really feel comfortable even talking about, let alone witnessing. Most of us don't want to tour a factory farm. Most of us don't want to tour a slaughter plant, and with good reason. It would not leave us with a whetted appetite by any means. Most of us would rather live in blissful ignorance about how the meat that we eat is produced. In fact, most people today don't eat meat because an animal was raised for it. Rather, they eat meat in spite of the fact that an animal was raised for it. And so I think that just in the same way today that we view horses very differently than they did in the 19th century. Then they were beasts of labor. Today, most people really view horses more like companion animals. Same thing with whales. We used to view them as an energy source. Now we view them as these majestic beings who we pay to get on boats just to go look at them. I mean, imagine telling a 19th century person there'd be a major industry of people who just go out just to look at whales and not do anything to them. Or we think about other animals who now we are no longer reliant on, like carrier pigeons. No, we don't necessarily think of them as companion animals, but we certainly don't envision them as these labor animals to transmit our information to one another. And the reason that we don't view these animals as our servants anymore is essentially because we're no longer reliant on their exploitation. And we can open up our minds to see them in a different way. Similarly, just in the same way, let's say that Copernicus and Galileo helped us to understand that we are not the center of the physical universe, I believe that the alternative protein industry can allow us to start seeing animals in a different way and recognize that maybe we aren't the center of the moral universe either, that maybe the other animals with whom we share this planet actually are here not merely for us, but are actually here with us too. Now, that type of a world in which we view other animals not merely as commodities who exist for the sole purpose of serving us may seem very foreign to those of us living in 2019. But lots of things seemed quite impossible at one time, right? Think about 150 years ago, let's say, in around 1850, the idea that you could have, well, let's think about it like this. Back then, the big societal debate that you could be a respectable member of society and be on either side of was what? Whether one human being could be able to own another human being. Today, if you take the wrong side of that debate, you'll be a social pariah in virtually any social circle in America. 100 years ago, we were still debating whether more than half of the population of America even ought to be able to vote. 50 years ago, we were debating whether whites and blacks ought to even be able to share the same water fountains. Imagine if you were to post on Facebook today that you had the wrong view on any of these, that you believed in segregation or slavery or denying women the right to vote. You would become a pariah. You might even make the news for just saying that you had that opinion. Yet, the blink of an eye ago, historically speaking, those were legitimate social views to hold. So what social views do we hold today that in the future may end up seeming quite archaic and perhaps even barbaric to us, to our descendants? I think that these future generations are going to be not that pleased when they learn about what we did to animals in our era. And they're going to be so glad that technology freed them from the need to do that. They're going to be so glad that the Peter Coopers of our era, those of you in this room, the entrepreneurs, the scientists, the investors, the people who are helping to create this industry out of thin air, an industry that 5 years ago did not even exist, that now has dozens of companies backed by tens of millions of dollars with funding from billionaires like Bill Gates and Richard Branson, and it's happening because of you. You all are the people who are helping to drive forward our society to a better, more humane future. A future in which we will be able to feed the masses because we are not reliant on such an archaic technology. A future in which we are not going to be subjecting animals to conditions that most of us don't even want to hear about. A future in which food safety problems like E. coli and salmonella that are so rampant today are not as big of a concern. You know why? Because when you're culturing animal products, like animal cells, you don't have to culture intestines at all. You're just culturing those muscle cells, so you don't have to worry so much about intestinal pathogens like E. coli and salmonella. Now, I believe that that day is not as far away as many of us would believe. I believe that that day is coming sooner, and it's going to be because of the work of so many people here. Now, it has been a long time since the days when horses were racing against trains. We've come a very, very long way. The cultured meat and the plant-based meat and the alternative meat space still has a long way to go before it starts winning any races against conventional meat. But I'm grateful to each and every one of you in this room who is helping to set that stage for a day when you, again, the Peter Coopers of our era, are going to help build a more humane society, a more civilized society, one in which we can really be proud of our relationship with our fellow creatures on this planet, and one in which we can be proud of how we are feeding ourselves without destroying our home, the only home that we have in the process. So I say thank you to each of you for everything that you're doing to create this movement. It's much more than an industry. It is something that I believe is perhaps the most morally pressing issue of our era, and I'm grateful to each of you, and I hope that I get to live as long as the day will come when each of us will be able to sit down together and be able to literally taste that cleaner, greener, more humane, more sustainable future all together. Thank you very much. Okay, we have a very short time for questions, so is there anybody in the front or anybody, I'm not going to bias anybody in the front, anybody anywhere who has a question? Alex? Oh, okay. Is there? I don't see anybody raising a hand, so I don't mind not taking any questions. Oh, there is. All right. The glaring light is preventing me from seeing you. Oh, yeah. Yeah, great. What's up? Yeah, cool.
So first, thank you.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed your book. It's actually what brought me to this space. I'm a student. I've got a long way to go. Your book really did it for me.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. I hope you left an Amazon review. Yeah, very good.
So one of the things you mentioned in your book, which I found fascinating, is the notion of percentages and combination of plant-based meat and real meat. And I'm referring to plant-based meat because I think the first order problem with cultured meat is not really the market right now, it's the science.
Yeah.
And so you said, like, in the future, a customer can go up and get a 60% burger or a 70% burger. I'm thinking, what's the barriers to that right now? So, for example, Subway and Tim Hortons and I think KFC is coming up with chicken soon.
Yeah.
What is the barrier commercially that is stopping us from having this sort of mixed product? Because you've done it already with your nuggets, and we have everything we need. Why can't I go to Subway yet and buy a 50% meatball sub?
50% meatball, like cultured meat, or you mean like
50% plant-based.
Yeah, plant-based. Well, I mean, first of all, I love your question. Thank you. And the biggest reason is because the Better Meat Co. hasn't been able to accomplish it yet. So we're trying, though. We're the only company really that's offering these type of formulations that allow for such high percentage blends that seamlessly blend in so that you can't tell any difference. And I believe that they should. There's no reason why meat has to be all meat. I mean, think about it. It's almost, if you think about like fuel in a car. You know, right now, if you put fuel in your car, probably like 15% of it is going to be ethanol, and you don't even think about it. Yet, you know, the purpose of that, one of the purposes is, allegedly to help us use fewer fossil fuels. And that's not a perfect analogy. There's other complicating factors associated with that. But I believe that the time will come in the closer to now future that we won't see meat as something that necessarily means entirely made from a slaughtered animal. That there will be blending that will be much more common, and plant-based meat will also be more common, and yes, cultured meat as well, I think will be more common. So really, the only reason I think, to answer your question why it hasn't happened yet, is a failure on our part to actually make that a possibility, but we're trying, I can promise you. I know we're out of time. I don't know if you want to do another. Okay, great, yeah, great.
Hi, Paul. Rob LeClaire here from AgFunder. Also a great book. Leave a review. I did. So why are people saying no? Why are the food companies saying no to this? Why are they resisting?
So first, I'm not sure it's a matter of resistance, Rob, and so I should note, Rob is with AgFunder. If you don't read AgFunder, highly recommend it. Really awesome site, and he writes some really insightful pieces on there as well, where he examines the industry. So I do highly recommend following him and AgFunder. But I don't know how much of it's really resistance. I mean, nobody is exploring this space. I shouldn't say nobody. Very few people are exploring this space, and part of the reason, I think, is because there's a lot of vegans in the space, and they just want people not to eat meat, so that's one. I think that there are a lot of pragmatists in that community, but it's not very status enhancing in that community, to put it mildly, to be doing that. So that's, I think, one issue. And then also you have a lot of other people who say, even if they're not vegetarian or vegan, who say, hey, look, people were switching to Beyond and Impossible, it's awesome. Why have this half measure? Well, they're not exclusive of one another. They're not exclusive at all. And so I don't know that it's so much resistance as much as it's like a small company like us is trying to satisfy high demand, and we're scaling up to do it. We're only 18 months old, and we are now, these products with Purdue are in 7,100 stores. It's going quite well, but we need to have other partnerships like that, and we're eager to work with big players in the meat industry, not just meat processors, but meat users, restaurant chains, meat snack companies, and CPG, frozen dinners, all that. So we want to work with them. So I would love to talk with you, Rob, about that to see what other insights you might offer to us to be more effective than we are. And I will say, since both Rob and what was your name? Cayman, thank you. I joked about the Amazon review. They really do matter on there, so I hope you'll remember to do it. Amazon, really, even one sentence, it matters. All right, yes. You can just shout. That's cool. I hear you. Okay, thank you.
Does it make it cheaper to add pea protein and plant-based proteins to the meats?
Yeah, definitely not pea protein. It's really expensive. But other types of proteins that we at Better Meat Co. use, we can outcompete beef on cost. We're not there on chicken yet. Chicken is really cheap. In fact, one thing that I learned through this process, a very depressing statistic. Anybody here know what the most expensive ingredient of making a chicken nugget is? The oil. Isn't that sad? These birds, man, they are really, really doomed. But anyway, Yeah, so in some cases, yes, in other cases, no. Pea protein, texturized pea protein, though, is really expensive, so that's why you see, one reason why you see products like Beyond selling for multiples over the cost of meat. Not 30 or 40% more, but like 300% more oftentimes. But there are other ways to do it, too. And I admire their company immensely. I hope we have a fraction of their success, but they're not yet competing on cost. You good to go, Alex? I don't want to deny anybody a question. I don't see, though, any, we do have, okay. I see we got one in the back here, yes.
This will be the last question.
All right.
But there is an opportunity to chat with Paul afterwards as well.
Hi, I know this wasn't the major point of your talk, but I'm curious, since you touched on it a little bit, how would a successful cell-based landscape change our relationship to animals fundamentally?
Good question. Well, thank you, Jake, for the question, Jake from Wild Earth. And, to be honest with you, Jake, I think that there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. First of all, there's a sign up here that says to smile. I don't know if somebody put this here for me, like I don't smile enough. Now I'm getting like self-conscious about it. So let me tell you about this. Did you put this here, Alex?
It's for everyone.
It's for everyone, okay. Anyway, yeah, it's working. Thank you, Ira. So I think that people have a lot of cognitive dissonance about meat consumption today and animals. In fact, there's a really interesting study on this. They took one group of people who were basically answering questions, and they gave them nuts to eat while they were performing these answers, and the other group they gave beef jerky. And they asked them about their view on, let's say, the intelligence of cows. And unsurprisingly, the people who were literally eating beef jerky at the time rated cow intelligence much lower than the people who were eating nuts. And it's not conscious, but they're thinking, like, they're trying to resolve that in their mind, eating this meat from an intelligent animal or eating meat from a dim-witted animal, or not eating meat, right? And so the question then becomes, if you don't have to solve for that dissonance, can you start viewing animals in a different light? Like today, we know that whales are actually really intelligent, really amazing animals. If somebody told you they had harpooned a whale, you'd probably view them as a moral monster. Yet it was a huge industry in the United States. Huge. We were one of the biggest whale-killing nations in the world. Now we're one of the biggest whale-watching nations in the world. And so I think that in the future, when meat production is divorced, when meat consumption is divorced from raising and slaughtering animals, that there will be less dissonance associated with accepting these animals for who they actually are. And we'll have a better, more realistic view of them, and we won't feel the need to justify our underestimation of their mental capacities. So I think there's other ways to look at it too, but overall, I'm quite convinced that, there's a saying, actually, my friend AJ Jacobs, who writes really great books. If you haven't read them, highly recommend it. I don't know if AJ invented this saying or not, but I've heard him say it, so he invented it to me, that it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting. So if you start acting a certain way, your beliefs follow. Rather, we believe ourselves falsely through our own self-exalting. We think that we're these rational creatures who deliberate, change our mind, then start acting differently. In reality, we start acting differently, and then we change our mind. There's so many people who I meet who have gone vegetarian who then all of a sudden started for health reasons, and then they all of a sudden have a moral revelation about animals, and they can't believe that we're treating animals. And so I think that's what's likely to happen, that as people start eating fewer animals, even if they're eating the same amount of meat, but if they're eating fewer animals, I think that they may come to have a different view, and it may be easier for them to see just how much harm we're inflicting today. So again, I really appreciate it, guys. Thanks so much for staying to the end of the conference. It's my honor to be here with you. I'm really grateful to each of you. Thank you.